John Willis, aka Bac Guai, became a media sensation a few years back when Rolling Stone published an interview with him from federal prison. Never on record has a white man rose so high in the ranks of Chinese organized crime. Chinese criminals aren't the first thing people think of when they think of the Boston underworld, but during the 80s and 90s, the hub's Chinatown was incredibly active. Let's explore some less talked about aspects of the John Willis, aka Bac Guai story. What's up, everybody? Welcome back. So I've got a story for you guys today that's been one of the most requested topics on this channel. The story of John Willis, aka the white dude from Boston who became a leader in Chinese organized crime. It's obviously a sensational story. Authorities say it's the first ever documented case of a Caucasian man being in a leadership position in Chinese organized crime. Out of all the different ethnic crime organizations, the Chinese and other Asian groups seem to be some of the most insular to outsiders. But John Willis was able to not only become a member of their organization, but thrived and rose in the ranks. He did this by completely immersing himself into Asian culture. I was hesitant about making a video about Willis because I felt like it was a topic that was a bit overdone. Like 3 or so years ago, he was interviewed by Rolling Stone while in federal prison, and it brought much media attention towards him, and a lot of people were basically just retelling the story from that interview.
I want to say like I'm shocked, like the lack of, I don't know, journalistic integrity or whatever you want to call it, when I'm like researching and I'm watching these videos on YouTube, and they're like, some of them are literally, first of all, they all came out around the same time, around 3 years ago, like directly after the Rolling Stones. I think this, I don't know if it's still really a culture on YouTube. I don't really like follow the trends on and stuff, but like a story would break, would be a big story, and people would just pounce on it and be like, oh, I gotta be the first one to get it and I'll get the views. I don't know, but it was like a series of videos basically all just regurgitating the same information right after that Rolling Stones article came out. And a couple of them, like, it's like word for word. I like watched the videos that I'm going back and reading. I'm like, dude, they didn't even like change any of the words around. They're just repeating it like straight off. Like it's like they're reading it off of the article. It's insane. Like, and then on top of that, it's one of the. It's like I'm not like trying to pick on anyone, but it's like a female, and she's reading it word for word, and she's mispronouncing it. Like she can't even say Whitey's last name correct, and it's like, oh my goodness, it's just I don't know. Nothing really shocks me anymore after the stuff I've read and seen after researching videos on my channel.
Now, I didn't want to go and retell the same stuff that has been repeated over and over again about Willis, but as chance would have it, a dear old friend hit me up this week and told me he was actually in jail with the man. Now, this was a different angle to the story. I didn't realize before he was sentenced that Willis was housed in the Essex County Correctional Facility. My friend, who funny enough just found out about my channel — I don't like to tell anybody about my channel, I like them to find out for themselves — that's the good side of social media, which, by the way, follow me on Instagram and message me with video ideas and info. I'm also on Facebook as well if you don't have IG. This is very recent, so I'm still learning how to use social media, so be patient with me. But Willis was apparently housed on 240D in Middleton while on pretrial. 240D and C are the two blocks where most of the high-profile pretrial inmates will go. Guys who are looking at life upstate or who are going to go to the feds for like 20 years. There's plenty of other pretrial blocks, but 240D and C are where you'll see all the big Dominican traffickers and guys whose crimes were just on TV before they arrived at the jail. So not surprisingly, Willis ran the block while he was in Middleton Jail. My buddy said that Willis was very polite, personable, and he had a baby face that my friend described as looking like baby Huey. But behind the boyish features and the kind words was a dangerous man. Apparently, besides the koi fish, dragon, and Chinese letters he has tattooed on his arms, he has a giant dragon back piece, which is quite a sight in real life, just a little bit intimidating. He's a guy who commands respect, not only because of his background and standing in the underworld, but also because of his personality and presence. Asians are the minority in Essex County. Back in the first decade of the 2000s, there was a big beef with the Deuce Boys and Lynn, BRD and other sets from Shirley Ave and Revere, with ABZ and other crews wearing blue, so there was an influx of Asian inmates during this time period. Traditionally, though, Essex County, Middleton Jail is majority Hispanic, with whites being a large percentage of the population as well. Black inmates probably make up less than 10%, and Asians are like less than 5%, probably like 1 or 2% of the population on average. So, with Asians being such a small percentage of Middleton Jail's population, it speaks to the presence of John Willis, aka Buck Guai, that he had so much power there. My buddy said that Willis owned every single store on the block, the white, Spanish, and black stores. A store is where you can get commissary items on credit if you're low until Saturday when the delivery comes. Usually it's 1 for 2, you borrow 1 soup from the store and then you pay back 2 on Saturday when you get your bag. And that's another thing, my friend said every week Willis would order the max amount on canteen and just get packets of chicken meat. He said he'd get an 80 banger every week of straight chicken. It's pretty funny. Used to be able to order a 100 bag every week, but I guess they changed that to 80. It's crazy in there. From the 3 pathetic state trays of food you get in Middleton daily, there's almost no protein. So if someone like Willis, who was very into working out and bodybuilding, wanted to supplement his protein intake, he'd have to house commissary chicken meat. Way back in the day when I first went to jail in '01, chicken and tuna came in cans, but people would put them in socks and use them as weapons, so they changed it to pouches. Interesting. Willis was a force. He took pride in how he carried himself, and it showed. That's how he ended up becoming so ingratiated in the Chinese criminal underworld in the first place. For people that don't know his story, as a young 16-year-old kid from Dorchester, he was basically orphaned. His mother, who suffered greatly from diabetes, passed away after much complications, which included losing her 2 legs. His father had previously left the family when John was a young boy returning to his native North Carolina. His siblings were caught up in the grips of addiction, so he was basically on his own. He turned to bodybuilding as a solace and channeled all his pain into that as an outlet. Even at 16, he was a presence. He looked much older than his age. This allowed Willis to secure a job as a bouncer at a Boston nightclub. Every Sunday night, they would have Asian karaoke night. Apparently, Asian people just love their karaoke. A scuffle erupted and a Korean man sprayed another Chinese man in the face with mace. Willis quickly broke up the fight and rushed the man to the bathroom and helped him wash the mace out of his eyes. That man was Vaping Joe, or John Joe, an important man in Boston's Chinese underworld. Joe gave Willis his card and told him if he ever needed anything to call him. A couple weeks later, the proud Willis was in desperate need of assistance. You see, the world is a cold place for a lone 16-year-old boy. He called the number on the card, and a little while later, 2 BMWs pulled up to pick up Willis. Joe was not with them, but Willis went anyways. Really having no other family or anyone to lean on, Willis accepted the help and jumped in with both feet. He left his old life of pain and suffering behind and adopted this new Asian lifestyle. At first, it was not easy. Although he had impressed Vaping Joe, a lot of his Asian peers didn't care for him. Willis was sent to Chinatown in New York City and was trained by some of the Chinese criminal elites. Willis took the time to learn and understand the culture. He learned 2 different dialects of Chinese and also Vietnamese. Vietnamese people were starting to move into Boston and other Asian communities en masse in the late 1970s and 1980s, many times bumping heads with the already established Chinese criminals and residents. Willis says he learned a lot of the language from watching TV, movies, and listening to music. Respect in general, but especially for elders, is a huge part of Chinese and Asian cultures. Willis understood this and gained respect within Chinatown's community for how he conducted himself. When Willis was in New York, he gained the nickname Bac Guai, which he says translates to white ghost, although everyone in the media likes to say it means white devil. When he returned to Boston, he rose to the ranks and ended up becoming close to a man in the underworld known as Bac Ming. When Willis started his relationship with Bac Ming, he was only a mid-level criminal in Chinatown. But in time and through a series of events, Bac would become one of the most powerful men in Boston's Chinatown, and Willis was his right hand. It's kind of funny because I keep hearing time and time again in these documentaries on YouTube that dealing was shunned by the Chinese criminals, and Willis had to do it in secret so Bac Ming and others wouldn't find out. They say Chinese was solely into gambling, loan sharking, and girls, but as far as I know, they were the biggest suppliers of a certain product throughout the 80s and early 90s. I was actually recently thinking about making a video about Bac Ming, Stephen Say, and Johnny Yang and the China White pipeline in the 1980s and early 1990s, so it's pretty funny to hear these people saying that dealing was strictly forbidden by the Chinese. I'm also pretty sure that it was triads in the West Coast who were responsible for teaching Mexicans the chemistry to make a super form of another very powerful and illegal product. Could have been the Japanese Yakuza, but I'm pretty sure it was triads. But anyhow, like I said earlier, not too many people think of Chinese criminals when they think of Boston.
But in the late 80s and early 1990s, the Chinese underworld was pretty crazy. Stephen Say, aka Sky Dragon, had been in charge of Chinatown for decades, but of late he had been challenged by upstarts, criminals from other cities, and an influx of Vietnamese immigrants. This struggle culminated in January of 1991 when 5 people were found dead on Tyler Street in Boston's Chinatown. One man crawled out into the snow looking for help and miraculously survived. It was an exclamation mark on the most dangerous period in Boston's history. It was the worst crime in the city since the infamous Blackfriars incident. I'll always remember being in Kowloon's on Route 1 in Saugus with my parents around this time period. Some Chinese guys, clearly high-profile criminals in fancy suits, started screaming at each other in Chinese until someone pulled one of the guys outside. The whole restaurant was silent. You could hear a pin drop. The tension was insane. I remember even as a kid knowing this had the potential to be a really bad situation. The city and surrounding areas were definitely a little bit tense around this time period. Besides the Chinese underworld conflict, there was an internal struggle between the Italian LCN. All the different hoods in Boston's black and Latino neighborhoods were at each other's throats. Whitey was doing whatever he was doing in Southie. And then there was the bank and armored car crews in Charlestown. Boston was a city on fire in the early 1990s, that's for sure. Through this chaos, Bac Ming rose to the top ranks of Chinatown's underworld. Sky Dragon lost his grip after the Tyler Street incident. The culprits, who are of Vietnamese descent, fled the country. 2 were captured after 20 years on the lam. 1 man is still at large. The feds offered a $30,000 reward on the 30-year anniversary of the crime. But throughout the 1990s, Bac Ming and Bac Guai, aka John Willis, built up their power base in Boston's Chinatown. So over time, Willis became 100% a Chinese criminal. With his spiky gelled hair and Chinese cultural tattoos, he became a top leader of a group called Ping An, which was a dominant group in Chinatown. There's one difference between Willis and the other Chinese criminals, though, was his hulking size. Asian people, while formidable, are physically generally kind of small in stature. As Bac Guai grew into a full-grown man, his love for bodybuilding and performance-enhancing products turned him into a monster of a man. With his strength and trademark temper, he was feared on the streets. In the later part of the 90s, infamous Hong Kong/San Francisco Chinese criminal Raymond Chow, aka Shrimp Boy, and his associate triad member from China, Peter Chong, began the Tian Ha Wei, or the Whole Earth Association. They were trying to unify all the Chinatowns in America and make a national syndicate similar to the Italian LCN. They were rolling through cities until they came to Boston and met resistance from Bac Ming and his muscle-bound enforcer, Bac Guai. Bac Ming obviously didn't want to submit to Chow and Chong and give control of the Chinese Boston rackets, but before hostilities could erupt, the feds intervened and arrested Shrimp Boy and Peter Chong. The feds had been apparently tracking the two's conquest of the American Chinese underworld. After some small jail and prison stints, Bac Guai John Willis found himself relocating to southern Florida, Broward County to be exact, on the state's southeast coast around 2005. Florida kind of unfortunately is like a second home to me. I used to go down there and visit my grandparents on the west coast a lot as a kid, in Northport, right where 1090 Jake is from. Then my girlfriend in my 20s went to college down there in DeLand in central Florida, and we were always there. And then Boynton Beach, which is down in Broward County. Then 2015, 2016, I lived in Pompano Beach, which is also in Broward County, and is where Kodak Black is from, and also where Bac Guai adopted as his new home. Pompano is an interesting place. Really, Broward County really in general is. Kodak Black obviously came from the hood, the projects in Pompano's Little Haiti, and Bac Guai lived in a $1 million mansion across U.S. Federal Highway 1. I lived in a halfway house on the fringe of the hood, kind of in between the two. Broward County, of course, became infamous in the early 2000s, mostly for the fact that it had the highest concentration of pain management clinics in the country, probably the entire world. Basically, with an MRI or an X-ray in hand, it didn't matter how old it was, or honestly, if it was even yours, you could go into said clinic and get the doctor to write whatever you wanted. There was no system in place in Florida to see if people were doctor shopping or if they had multiple prescriptions of the same medications, so people basically could go from one clinic to another and rack up the scripts. Willis found out about this early on and began a sophisticated trafficking operation. He would put the illegal product into multivitamin bottles, reseal them, and ship them to Massachusetts, where the product was in incredibly high demand. This was a huge racket back then. I know a lot of people that were involved. The feds claim that Willis amassed a fortune of over $4 million, which he claims is a gross underestimation, and shipped over 26,000 units from Florida to Massachusetts. Another gross underestimation, in my opinion. Alright, so real quick interlude in your guys' video. First of all, big shout out to the Celtics, going to the Eastern Conference Finals once again. What's up? All Celtics out for guys who say I don't support the local Massachusetts teams. And I said that I would give a big shout out to this kid, Matthew Tottenham. He's trying to start a channel on YouTube. I think it's
W/number, but it's also his name. I think I'm pronouncing it right, Matthew Tottenham. He was just on the Bounce Back podcast, and of course, as always, big shout out to my man B. Luke, the Bounce Back podcast. The guy is doing so much. He's come such a long way. He's really turned into such a great interviewer, and it's awesome to watch that. So big shout out to that platform. He does so much to bring like mass creators together and like creating this whole movement. He does so much behind the scenes. So big shout out to those guys as always. Big shout out to my friend Stevie who helped me with this video. He's come up on 6 years clean. I'm so proud of him. And back to your video, guys.
Unfortunately for Willis, he began being investigated after he showed up to a friend's to collect something in a bright red Humvee. His friend was under surveillance, and Bac Guai piqued the feds' interest, so they began following him. Bac Guai was traveling back and forth from South Florida to Massachusetts to tend to his business. He was spotted by the feds coming out of a massage parlor in Cambridge. Later after that, he was pulled over and $100,000 was in his possession. The officer returned his money and didn't arrest him. Once this happened, Willis knew the authorities were onto him and that his time on the street was limited. Even though he was making money hand over fist, the lifestyle was taking its toll. Willis's beautiful Vietnamese girlfriend was growing weary of the business and asked him to retire. He also was a father figure to her 8-year-old daughter and was starting to feel wrong about setting a bad example. Finally, after one of his couriers was apprehended, a month or so later on his girlfriend's daughter's 9th birthday in 2011, the feds stormed his Pompano mansion under their warrant and took Bac Guai away. He told the girls to stay inside and not to worry, but still it must have been a really traumatic experience for the 9-year-old girl. While the legal process was unfolding, Willis was put on a federal hold and was housed in the Essex County Correctional Facility, aka Middleton Jail. My friend, shout out Stevie, was housed on 240D with him. My buddy was a little bit of a jailbird when he was younger and was always in and out, and everyone in Middleton knew him. Congratulations, I'm so proud of him. He's turned his life around. He's coming up on 6 years clean. He's an inspiration and a miracle, truly. I'm so proud of you, Stevie. But apparently Bac Guai John Willis took a liking to him. I mean, how can you not? Stevie, like usual, was kicking, and Bac Guai nicknamed him Sick Boy. Actually, it was something else sick, but I don't want to say it for monetization reasons. We'll see if they even monetize this video. You never know. It never hurts to have a powerful guy take a shine to you, especially in there. So Bac Guai ran 240D during his time in Middleton. Like I said, he controlled all the stores. He was incredibly disciplined. His days were structured and in routine. He had regimented workouts followed by copious amounts of chicken and protein intake. He encouraged the younger inmates to exercise, keep their cells clean, keep their appearances neat. He even chastised guys for using while they were locked up. He said it wasn't a good look. He had what my buddy called good prison ethics. Bac Guai John Willis, not surprisingly, quickly got one of the COs on 240D under his thumb. Now you have to understand that COs, even though they have a job to do, they're just people too. They're just as susceptible to the charisma and charm of a guy like John Willis just as much as his criminal peers. Start off small like these relationships do, usually with a small favor. Then the favors grow until you see how far the CO is willing to go and what amount of trust has been built. Eventually, the CO is bringing in all different kinds of contraband for Bac Guai. Probably the most sought after and valuable piece of contraband in jail/prison is cell phones. The phones in jail are a pain. They used to cost a lot of money, and the authorities record and listen to everything that's said on them, especially if you're a high-profile prisoner like Willis. Apparently, Willis would lounge in a cell at night, talking and texting loved ones. My buddy Stevie said they made a last-minute change to visits, and he wanted to tell his now ex-girlfriend about it, but he didn't have any money on his phone. So Bac Guai did him a solid, went in his cell and called her for him. How convenient. The level of trust with the CO became so deep that eventually Bac Guai offered him 10 grand in an effort to escape the jail before his lengthy prison sentence. Even though it's only a county jail, Middleton's still maximum security and it's almost impossible to escape from. For a single CO, this would be an impossible task. In a similar incident, the lunatic cross-dressing doctor shot from Wenham, Mass., who was responsible for his wife's death, tried to bribe a guard in Middleton to help him escape in the early 2000s. I remember in 2001 when they would move him, like if he went to the nurse or programs building, they'd freeze movement in the whole jail. I could see him out the window of 80 lower, and he was a really creepy looking dude. He had like a cat face. I don't know, it's hard to describe. He was just really creepy looking. Bac Guai was getting very comfortable in 240D. He owned all the stores. Many of his fellow inmates looked up to him. He had a CO in his pocket, but his situation on the outside was very bleak.
If he took his case to trial and he lost, he'd be looking at the rest of his good years in prison. But the deal, 20 years, was not much better. With no hope of escaping and fleeing to a foreign country with his Vietnamese girlfriend and their daughter, it seemed like a plea deal was Willis's best bet. Before this happened, a CO on 240D made the crucial mistake of disrespecting Bac Guai. For someone who based their whole life's template on the moral of respect, this was an affront that Willis could not ignore. So John Willis, aka Bac Guai, told the CO that no one talked to him like that. The CO continued to talk to Willis in a denigrating manner, so Bac Guai basically told him his days on earth were over. Coming from a man of Willis's stature and background, the CO and the jail's internal investigators believed it was a completely valid threat, and they shipped him out of Essex County. This, of course, was much to the dismay of my buddy Stevie and the other inmates on the block that were enjoying the benefits of having a guy like Johnny Willis around. I'm sure the CO that was bringing Willis stuff in, too, was being financially compensated and probably didn't mind that extra pay bump. John Willis, aka Bac Guai, the White Ghost, took the plea deal of 20 years and is currently serving his sentence in a federal prison. His story truly is a great chapter in Boston underworld lore, and if his life doesn't deserve a movie, then really what does? Come on, Wahlberg and Affleck, let's go. I hope you guys like this little spin on a well-known story. God knows you guys have requested it enough. A lot of people were just doing the story over and over again, repeating the same information after that Rolling Stones article was published. But I think you guys will enjoy a different spin on a great Boston and Massachusetts story. So I hope you guys all enjoyed.
So I'd hope, like always, the John Willis, aka Bac Guai, the White Ghost story would be a cautionary tale. No matter how high you rise in the criminal underworld, the flip side is never worth it. He says it himself in his Rolling Stones article interview. Look where I'm sitting now, I'm in prison. He's not able to enjoy the millions and all the fancy things he accumulated while at the height of his criminal empire. He's not with his beautiful Vietnamese girlfriend or her daughter that they shared together. You know, he's sitting in a prison cell. So the criminal lifestyle is never the right choice. If you like this video, hit the like button, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. But you guys know, as always, the most important thing, make good decisions, make good choices, take good care of yourself, your family, your friends, your fellow human beings. Try to have a nice day, guys. I'll talk to you soon. God bless.